Hi, thanks for tuning in to the Purple Team podcast. I'm Eliza May Austin. I'm joined today by James Bohr, and he's going to introduce himself.
I'm James Bohr. I'm now a cybersecurity consultant. I've been through various different roles in cybersecurity, and I'm currently working for an insurtech firm who are great, and doing general security consultancy. Nice and easy.
So before we get on to any Purple Team stuff, talking about anything to do with Purple Teaming, I want to just talk about this Cyber Cafe Scientifique, because I'm looking at your LinkedIn profile. You've had this for like a month. It's a society that you run. I've checked it out myself. It looks pretty interesting and geeky. Do you want to just like tell the world about it?
Yeah, I can do a quick bit of history. There is a movement called Cafe Scientifique, which is about setting up science talks in coffee shops or art galleries or similar. About 7 years ago, I was involved with setting one up in a wine bar in my hometown at the time. That was still running up until lockdown, and then when lockdown hit, I decided I would do the incredibly sensible thing of taking it from a monthly event, which was in a wine bar, to an online event with no idea how to set it up online, where I would be trying to do weekly or more events. That ran for about 3 months, and the reception I got for it from the academic community was such that I decided to make it an official organisation so that I could bring more people on board and stop it relying so much on me. So that's the stage I'm at with it at the moment. It's a non-profit just running to try and get people talking about scientific topics, give people the opportunity to talk about their research, and give the public the opportunity to discuss it and input into it, and show academics or researchers that people are genuinely interested in what they're doing.
Sounds awesome. I think there should be more stuff like that. You don't hear much about. Well, I'm gonna say you don't hear much about science, but it depends where you look. Of course you do. But yeah, a lot of the material out there is in journals, and if you want the hard facts, it's quite hard to digest. So I think it's a great idea.
It's not just that it's in journals, it's that when people come across science, it's usually presented to you. There's not much conversation about it. It's in an article, or it's in a lecture, or it's on TV. There's not much in the way of conversation dialogue about scientific topics. So that's what the whole Cafe Sci movement, not just my little part of it, but the whole thing is trying to address, to get a conversation going instead of just delivery.
So you were currently heavily involved with the Open Security Summit that happened this year during lockdown. It was pretty good. I attended some bits myself. I didn't manage to get to most of it just because of work commitments, but I know you did a lot of stuff on threat modeling, and I'm really interested to sort of look at the overlap between threat modeling and purple teaming. So can you just give anyone that's listening sort of a general overview of what threat modeling is and what it enables you to do?
Yep, it's the way I see it is often it's pen testing without the pen test. So it's planning out, looking through, seeing what threats might exist, looking at the vulnerabilities that they might exploit, and looking at the risks that arise and how you address them. But it's doing that at the design stage rather than when you've already delivered something. So it's not a vulnerability scan because there is nothing to scan. It's not a pen test because there is nothing to actually go out and test. It's doing the same sort of methodologies as you do when you do a pen test or a vulnerability scan, but before you've started building anything. That's the ideal use for it. Often it doesn't get done, or it gets pushed until much later in the cycle. But ideally, you do it right at the beginning. You can do threat modeling against the actual requirements of a project. You can do it against technical designs wherever you want. And the aim is to risk manage it, because of course a risk is what you get when you've got a threat and a vulnerability.
So someone explained threat modeling to me a couple of years ago, about, like if you had a blueprint of a building, you'd be able to see from that blueprint the potential ways in and out, and how you'd be able to navigate it, potentially you'd be able to see the security controls for the building and whatnot. And it's kind of the same thing, especially with application security. Is that right?
Yes, there are different ways to do it. So some of them do go as detailed as you've got the blueprint of the building application system, whatever it is, you know what technologies will be used, and you can go down to that level of what's the specification for this door or this service, depending on whether you want to do physical or software. Some of the approaches are much higher level, where you might instead say, okay, I want to get to a safe in a building. And you're not going down to that granular level of what model security camera do they have. You're just saying, well, there will be doors in the way. How would someone get through the doors? So there are different approaches. They all work at different layers of abstraction, and they do go from the highest level conceptual threat modeling all the way down to the deep nitty gritty, where you are basically doing theoretical pen testing.
I can't believe I actually never, no disrespect, but I'd never come across you at all until like a few weeks ago. And you posted about bees, and I was like, oh my God, this is a sign.
I'm going to blame it on me being much more active on LinkedIn in the last few months.
Oh, is that it? Okay, yeah, possibly. Oh, well, let me ask you about bees. So actually, before we get to that, let me make a note. I need to ask you about bees, just because we need to rope bees in here somehow. Okay. So yeah, with purple teaming, that very much. Start again. So with threat emulation purple teaming, that's very much predicated upon an initial theoretical base where you are creating a template for attack based on the most likely adversaries in a customer environment. So theoretically looking at the network and theoretically, trying to determine where the attack methodologies an advanced attacker would use in that network. So that's like where I was thinking there's some overlap there with threat modeling, and I think it's just a really key skill to learn, whether you're an offensive penetration tester, someone that calls everyone a fat cow while they're hacking a box, or working in defense. I think it's sort of the theory behind understanding the conceptual activities that could potentially happen is really underrated. And I like the fact that there's this threat modeling and purple teaming movement that's happening at the moment, and it's sort of bringing the theory closer to the technical. So yeah, awesome. So you got any more to say on that?
I do. I can go on about this for quite a while. I'm almost religious about it. I agree.
You wear a gown?
No, I've not worn a gown since my graduation. Sadly, they don't let you wear them for special occasions. No, I do think it's probably the most useful skill I have personally come across. That doesn't mean everyone will find the same, but in security, just the concept of threat modeling and then being able to apply it to different scenarios and getting past the idea that threat modeling is any one particular methodology. It's an approach, and it's an approach which is incredibly useful for security, for business continuity, disaster recovery, any sort of incident response. It is just massively powerful to explore threats, whether they're human or otherwise, and think about them. And it deals with the large bit that we're missing in security of security by design, because it lets you plan out and think through that type of thing in a directed, useful way right at the start, when you can fix it without having to undo 6 months of work.
Yep, spot on. I couldn't have said it better myself, literally.
I am passionate about it and have got quite shouty at times. So
no, this is good because you're not pointlessly passionate about it. You've done so many talks on this subject. You've done webinars and classes and all kinds of things for free for people. So go at it. We need to exchange knowledge, and this is something that unfortunately doesn't happen enough in some areas of cybersecurity, and a lot of people haven't come across. threat modeling before, and a lot of people haven't come across purple teaming before. So I do definitely think that we have an obligation, if we understand those concepts, to relay them to the world, because ultimately, that sounds so pig-headed, but ultimately, the more knowledge that is out there, the better secure our national infrastructure is at the end of the day. And that's what we want, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I would rather not have power stations shut off because of a phishing attack. So it's not entirely selfless, but it benefits everyone.
So I went to this thing. So do you know Saskia Kaplantz or Coplantz? I always pronounce the second name wrong. She's probably going to hate me for that. So Saskia she's one of the co-founders of Digital Interruption, and they're based in Manchester. Anyway, at the mid last year, maybe the back end of last year, back in the last summer, I don't know. She ran a workshop on threat modeling, and she printed out these. It was quite good. I was in the area and I went along, and she printed out these application layouts, like we said, a blueprint on a piece of paper, and then just like handed them out to everyone. And there were people there that had like no experience whatsoever in cybersecurity, and she was just explaining that, okay, forget all the technological things, forget all of the acronyms and everything you think you should know. Just look at the application and use common sense and try and work out, if I had access to the application at this point, would I be able to get to that point? Would I be able to do this? Would this be possible? Would this be possible? And just like go through this list of stuff. And actually, it was like super helpful. And I think everyone that left there sort of had an insight into threat modeling. So it's actually quite an easy skill to acquire, although the knowledge behind it has to be there, obviously.
I will just say the knowledge behind it doesn't have to be in the person doing it. So this is another bit where I can get a bit shouty. I spent 6 months researching this for my dissertation, so I can speak with at least a bit of authority on it. It's entirely possible to build a threat modeling method that does not require the user to know all of the technology, because what you do is you have a series of questions and a library. And that's all that they need. You can go, okay, here's how you identify a weak point, and then here, go through these questions, and you will find the threats that apply. Because they're very formulaic.
So could you automate that then? Like, yes. Is that something that, okay.
Yeah,
so is there many companies out there that are automating that?
There is. I've never managed to get a demo or a trial of their product, but I have read some of their research, and they were kind enough to share some of their research with me. And they work on a particular methodology. It's not my favorite one, but it's one that works well for automation, where they produce a extensive technical threat library. And essentially what you do is you put in your architectural diagram, your system diagram, and you get your threat model out.
Oh, how does that work? Like, I understand how a vulnerability scan would work. But I don't understand how that would work from like a drawing or something.
So if you bear in mind it's an architectural diagram, so it's built on something like Visio. So you've identified objects, you've worked out data flows and so on. There is structure to it, but you've not built the actual product. And you do have to build the diagram in a compatible way. So it makes sense of what you're drawing, and all it's doing is translating that from here's the picture to what does that mean for the system? Okay, if it means that for the system, what are the threats that apply at these points?
This is a really cheesy ad break. This podcast was brought to you by Pocket Seam, the world's most cost-effective seam service.
You also are a beekeeper. This is so interesting. You like do this cafe side thing. You're a threat modeler. You work in cybersecurity, and you're a beekeeper. Are you also like an amazing dancer as well?
No, I can't dance at all. Definitely no dancing. I do a bit of lock picking, but I think everyone in security does at least a bit of that.
I'm terrible.
I
I'm
do
absolutely
home
terrible at
brewing.
lockpicking.
I do make my own wine and mead, so that might count. After a few glasses of the mead, then I feel like a good dancer at least.
With your lockpicks. Well, you actually told me that you made mead, and it's one of my favorite drinks. So you might have to send me some mead.
Unfortunately, it's in a barrel, but when it's ready to bottle, I'll send some over.
So how do you make mead then, quickly?
There's different approaches. I go for the easy way, where I get honey and water and some sugar, because the yeast doesn't like the sugar in honey on its own. Add some yeast and leave it for a long time.
How long's a long time?
With mead, you're looking at a minimum of about 6 months, up to maybe a year, and then if you want it to be
Wow.
really nice, you want to store it for another 2-3 years after that, and you'll get a really nice mellow flavour out of it. If you have it young, when it's 6 months to a year old, it can taste a bit fresh, a bit too much like honey and not enough like mature mead.
Right, you need to check out this company called, and this is for anyone that's listening, this is not sponsored, but there is a company called Apothecary Mead. I don't know if you've come across them, but their mead is absolutely amazing.
Not come across them. I've come across Mognac, who are quite nice.
I'm going to send you a link
I've
right
just
now.
found them.
Oh, they're absolutely amazing. And there's one of their bottles. I've actually got the first ever bottle from the first batch, and I daren't open it.
Oh, drink it. Drinks are for drinking. If you
I
save
know,
it
but
for a
it's just
special occasion, then you'll never drink it.
no. There's so many special occasions. So yeah, it's fantastic mead. So I would advise anyone to go and buy some. And they're northern, so obviously I'm going to promote them. And the bottle's beautiful. You did something about how a beehive can be likened to threat modeling, was it?
It was to try and get some basic terms defined, and people probably will disagree with me on what the definitions are, but they're the ones I use and like. So related to threat modeling, also risk management and defining a vulnerability.
Well, please go for it and explain your beehive analogy.
I've got a particular view of what a threat is, a vulnerability and a risk, and the threat is something that is entirely out of your control. The vulnerability is a weakness that is within your control, or a hole that's within your control, and the risk is what arises out of the combination of those two. There's also opportunity involved, but we'll get to that. So for most people, a swarm of bees coming into their garden is a threat. It's not something you can do anything to prevent unless you want to enclose the whole garden, which you don't. And even then, it's still a threat. It's just one way you've closed off the vulnerability. The vulnerability is having some area in your garden where they might decide to set up a hive and settle in. And so the risk is that you end up with a beehive in your roof, building wax, storing honey, and then one day it gets too warm, it all melts, and you get honey dripping from your ceiling. So that's the threat, risk, and vulnerability. And then in risk management, you've obviously got this idea of opportunities as well, which can arise from risks. And it's very much contextual. So for most people, a bee swarm coming into their garden is a threat, and there's a risk that they might stay. We happen to have 2 of our empty hives in the garden, and they've been cleaned up and just left out because they can be stored outside. So we had a swarm of bees come into the garden and set up in one of the hives, which means instead of a risk, there was a positive outcome due to the measures we'd taken, admittedly unintentionally. And we then had a commercially viable beehive, all for free, because bees are quite expensive. It's about £250 for a swarm, for a nuke, as they're called. So there you go. That was the whole point of the analogy. It was about threat, vulnerability, risk, and opportunity. I am going to say one thing. If you can get, this isn't it is a plug. I'm not being paid for it. I don't get any referral. But if you can get hold of Adam Shostak's book, Threat Modeling, Designing for Security, It
I've
is
got that. It's
the
fantastic.
great tome on threat modelling. I'm not going to bother writing a book on threat modelling because it's all covered in there. The approach, the idea that it is an approach rather than a specific method, but that you can use methods to give it direction, to narrow it down. It is definitely worth a read.
So that's like the book then that you would have wrote. If that wasn't available, that's where you would have aimed for, and you've read it and gone, oh, crap, this is brilliant.
Yes, that's the book I would have written after reading it if I hadn't already read it.
What are your plans for the future in terms of your career? Not like just, I'm going to go to Eastbourne.
I've got a mission. I've got a fervent mission to deal with this idea that cybersecurity and info security and other types of security are all somehow separate disciplines, and I really want to get the message across, even if people are going to disagree with me, that there is security and then there are the domains that you apply it in.
Mm-hmm.
And in that, I'm not saying, oh, well, InfoSec, CyberSec, they're just risk management. They're both working in IT. We're just using different silly terms. It's including physical security, close protection, executive protection, food security, medical security, nations, take your pick. It's all security. It's all fundamentally the same. The only bit that changes is the domain that you are applying those security fundamentals to. And we can get so much benefit by stealing ideas from the other domains, to put it bluntly.
We're all working for the same goal at the end of the day, or we should be. Yeah, fantastic. I couldn't have said that better myself. Well, I mean, literally, I haven't said anything of value. I haven't said anything of value in this podcast whatsoever. You just totally put me to shame.
You have. You've shown me where to get some great mead that I'm now going to be ordering after this.
Thanks for tuning in. I'm Eliza May Austin. I was joined today by James Bohr, who does not live up to his name. He is not a pig, nor is he boring. See you next time.